Skypiea is a bit of a weird arc in One Piece. People can't seem to decide where it belongs on their ultra-specific One Piece tier lists, whereas other arcs have a more defined consensus. We all have our own opinions, but let's be real here. Marineford and Water 7 are almost always at the top. Fishman Island and Thriller Bark are generally hated. Wano and Dressrosa are a bit more contentious, but are generally leaning positive. But Skypiea is interesting because before, it was considered one of the worst arcs in One Piece. But now, I see it range from pretty good to one of the best, apparently. But before we talk about Skypiea, we first need to look at Jaya. Jaya is similar to Logtown in that it's one of those world-building arcs. There's arcs that don't follow the typical format of we need to beat this guy before he fucks up the island, but instead are entirely dedicated to world-building and setting up future events. It introduces characters like Blackbeard and some of the other warlords of the sea, like Kuma and Doflamingo, a pretty strange group of chums. I mean, they look pretty interesting, right? I don't know, I might just be getting a little silly here, but maybe these guys might be important later on. Take notes. But most importantly, we hear about this island in the sky that was documented in a book by a man named Mont Blanc Nolan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. This is overall a pretty interesting arc for One Piece. There's not a whole lot of action, except this part, but more so setting the stage for not only the next arc, but future events to come. I'm gonna give it a B tier. It's pretty good stuff. But now, we head to the mysterious island of Skypiea. Oh my god, would you look at this place? There's clouds, and you can bounce in the clouds, and there's a slide of clouds, and there's a melon, and it's so beautiful. Skypiea is such a big leap for Oda as a world builder. You look at East Blue. Pretty mild fantasy stuff here and there, but relatively normal for One Piece as a whole. Alabasta is where he starts getting a lot more creative with the environments, and Skypiea is when he fully embraces the fantasy, dreamlike elements of this world. I'd say Skypiea has a particularly good momentum when compared to some of the previous arcs in One Piece. Even in the beginning, we see the dangers of Sky Island, and then we get into this battle royale, and we fight these henchmen motherfuckers. We meet this race of people called the Shandorians, only to culminate as it becomes a battle against the big bad Enel, who is a very good follow-up to Crocodile, as one, he's got swag, just like him, and also he's God. Pretty crazy stuff. As I mentioned before, Skypiea was considered one of the weaker arcs in the series, and after reading it myself, I'm not quite sure why. To me, it's just like any other arc in the series. We get a super interesting location, we do some touring, it changes up the formula here and there, and we get a good villain, so what's wrong with it? I tried to do some research on why people didn't like it, and you can tell me why you didn't like it in the comments. I'll be happy to see what you guys have to say. But for the most part, the issues I came across were either very minor complaints or things that you can apply to other arcs in the series. One critique I've heard thrown around is that Skypiea feels like filler. What? Basically, it feels disconnected to the story and a little too self-contained. This confused me at first because, wait, isn't every arc in One Piece its own self-contained story? But I think what they're trying to say is that something like East Blue or Alabasta has more connection to the wider world, like involvement of the Marines, core characters being introduced, or even Straw Hat members being introduced. In that sense, I can understand, but Skypiea still does its part in contributing to the broader story. Maybe not in the same way, but you're still getting things like general foreshadowing. I feel like this panel of Joy Boy is a pretty easy, low-hanging fruit, but it's something that was introduced in this arc specifically, so at the time, I can understand that there doesn't feel like there's too much of a connection and it doesn't really mean anything to you. Alright, that's fair. But then there's also the poneglyphs being shown to us in Alabasta and later showing up in Skypiea, which at this point have established themselves to be pretty important. In fact, I'd say that Skypiea up to this point had given us some of the most interesting lore and background in the series, with this backstory in particular being one of my favorites. I can't really go into too much detail because honestly I'm pretty foggy on a lot of the details, but I'll say that Oda put a lot of work into really fleshing out the history of Skypiea, how certain things came to be, as well as a lot of the inner conflicts, as it delves into themes of colonialism. A lot of these things also tap into a big element of One Piece called the Void Century. a sort of hidden away piece of history that was kind of erased due to the doings of the world government. In that regard, I'd say Skypiea is a pretty fascinating arc. So for a while, I was pretty confused on this arc's negative reception. But then I checked out the anime version. There's definitely a good chunk of people who watch this arc through the anime, so I saw some clips and I said to myself, something about this looks really boring, but I can't put my finger on it. Like, I don't know, I saw a few clips and yeah, I really did feel like that if I watched this arc through the anime, I could see myself getting kind of bored. It might be the dull colors, I don't know, but I didn't really feel this way when I was looking at clips for other arcs. In fact, I wouldn't really mind watching the anime of East Blue or Alabasta if it had good pacing. Speaking of pacing, I also noticed that Skypiea is debatably the part of the story where a lot of the pacing issues really started to arise. So if I had to boil it down, I'd say that the issues people had with Skypiea mainly came from the anime, especially since when I hear people talk about how Skypiea is lame, they mainly refer to the anime.
I did like the Iniru fight from the Skypiea arc, even though Skypiea as a whole absolutely blew filthy fucking ass.
His take on Skypiea, I 100% agree. I think like the first 70% of Skypiea is boring as shit, and One Piece fans overrate the fuck out of that bitch.
But nonetheless, people really fuck with Skypiea nowadays. I don't know, maybe they read it through the manga, maybe the reread or rewatch was just better, or maybe it just flows better on a binge, or maybe they just like the fact that it foreshadows Gear 5. I don't know. Revisionist history works in mysterious ways. I'd say that this is one of the more cleanly executed arcs of One Piece. The only real criticisms I would give is that the finale kind of drags for a bit, as the backstory I was talking about is placed right smack in the middle of Luffy trying to land the final blow on an L, and there's a specific section in the story that feels a bit slower as some of the henchmen are being introduced. But again, this is something you can apply to other arcs in the series. There's a lot of arcs in One Piece that have moments or sections that feel noticeably less exciting than others. But overall, I had a blast with this arc. I think it's on par, if not maybe a little bit better than Alabasta. I mean, it's kind of hard to choose. I still think Alabasta probably has higher highs than Skypiea, but Skypiea is just such a blast from beginning to end, and embodies that adventure feeling of One Piece in its own unique way. I'm giving Skypiea an A tier. And overall, I'm feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on this record.